Software engineering burnout is real in any job, but particularly related to software engineering and web development. There's so much going on, and there's the feeling of constant overwhelm. There's so many tools, there's so much going on. And that's what I want to talk about in this video: how to overcome the software engineering overwhelm, especially in your first year, and how to master software engineering and development and progress in your career and what you're looking to do and all your goals. While it's super rewarding, at the same time, it has this tremendous overwhelm, this feeling that you're never doing the right thing, this feeling that you're going to crash and burn, like you're never going to accomplish and fully grasp the language or the code or the technology that you're working on. And that's something that's not talked about, especially with software engineering and development, is that it is a tremendous amount of information and it's constantly changing, and it's something really difficult to manage. Whereas in one field, you have a couple of things you may have to master, but in engineering and development, you need to master so many tools. There's just an overwhelming amount of tools, and it isn't you that is dealing with it. It's everybody, and it's totally understandable. Every other day, there's either upgrades, new packages, new tools, a change of tools, and it's so difficult for a senior developer, let alone for a new developer. So how do you do that? And how do you not get overwhelmed and not get burned out? And how do you master this? In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 things I think you can do to not get overwhelmed, but particularly not burn out, but more so learn how to master and enhance your development and become be able to do the things that you want to do with development. Because what good is a tool unless you know how to build stuff with it? Because I think a lot of us, when we come into software development, we want to build things. So what good is it if you don't know? The first thing, as a preface, I would say, realize that I think you're never going to arrive. And I think the thing is that, because development is so vast that there's almost no way. It's almost like imagine you're at war, and the enemies, no matter how many of them you knock down, there's just a new enemy. It's one of those games. It's not where you're ever going to get to the master, in the game. You're constantly going to have enemy A, enemy B. Then when you turn around, there's enemy C. You have to look at your path in development, that you're always conquering this, quote unquote enemy. I'm sure there's other ways you could look at this in a more positive way, but just for the sake of the example, this enemy, then enemy B, then enemy C, then enemy D. You shouldn't look at it as a way of, I got to get to the end, because that is going to be a sure way to feel burnout, overwhelmed. So firstly, just realize as a preface that you're not really just aiming to get to the end. It's constant, evolvement. Because of the fact that there's so many tools, how do we manage this, especially as your first year in development? Well, again, I'll give you 3 things. The first sort of secret, I say, as I've been in this for more than a decade, maybe 15 years development, and seeing the progression of code. So I can see a lot of new developers come to me and are like, I don't know what to do, and I understand, and it's insane. The first secret, I would say, is from someone who kind of been in the game for longer, is you need to categorize the tools. This is what's crazy, is that once you come to development, you're hearing about React, Express, Vue, MongoDB, SQL, MySQL, DigitalOcean, Droplets, Lambda functions, serverless functions, NoSQL databases. Like AWS, you're just going insane, right? With the amount of Python, Ruby on Rails. What is all of this? The first step to not getting burned out, even as a senior, is categorize your tools. You're not trying to accomplish everything. You need to first understand the landscape. The beauty of YouTube is that you get to get all of these tutorials, but at the same time, there's so many different tutorials, and you're like, oh, someone's talking about this, should I learn this? Someone's talking about that, should I learn that? So the key is to start to be able to categorize the tools, that these tools go together, these tools go together. At large, there's going to be databases, server-side stuff, front-end stuff. A lot of the tools are going to fall around those areas. So you need to kind of, well, what tools go together? Like, what's the category of tools that go together? So for example, React, it's a JavaScript framework, right? So what is the other JavaScript frameworks? React, Vue, Angular, maybe some jQuery if it's a library, vanilla JavaScript. These are what go together. When it comes to server side, you're going to have Node.js. We'll use some Express. You may have Python, Apache servers. There's some languages that sort of do a lot of it together. It could be like Ruby and PHP can sort of like do a lot of different things. Database systems, you have like MySQL, JSON databases, what is like NoSQL databases. Knowing the landscape and not getting caught up, because when you hear everything, you think everything works, right? You think like, I'm supposed to do, I have to know it all. And that's the part of the overwhelm. Categorize your tools. That's a whole video by itself, but just learn which tools go together. What tools are for what exactly do they do? And again, database, servers, front end, things like that. Those things get categorized together and they won't get mixed. So the second thing is choose your tool and ignore the rest. Amongst these categories, you're going to choose the tool of your choice. Whatever you decide to use, that's what you're going to use, or whatever your job, is using, that's what you're going to use. But what happens is a lot of developers are still on their own learning. They may not have jobs. Choose the tool, decide, and ignore everything else. Once you understand the landscape, you have to choose the tools amongst those sets. So if you're going to be doing JavaScript, front-end development or full stack, these days, a lot of this stuff all goes together. You have Angular, React, Vue. You go with React. Then you're no longer looking up Vue tutorials, jQuery tutorials, whatever pops up in your feed. Those are things you're just going to ignore. You're going to focus on the tool you decided to move forward with. Amongst databases, if you have, MySQL, Postgres, SQL, MongoDB, whatever you end up choosing, that's your tool. So if it's MongoDB, then you forget about, MySQL, you forget about Postgres, only focus on MongoDB if that's your choice, right? So amongst these categories, you're going to sort of take a direction and choose a tool, because these categories are all important and you're going to need to kind of put them all together. So whatever goes with databases, whatever goes with the server side, whatever goes on the front end side, you're sort of choosing. And of course, certainly a lot of times the tool of your choice sometimes dictates some of the other supplementary tools, right? So a lot of times, like if you choose a React, sometimes certain, and not always, like people decide in different things, but you'll hear like the stacks that go together. You can decide, I'm going to do React and I'm going to use Express, or I'm going to do React and I'm really going to focus on Next.js, which has its own sort of custom side server, or Gatsby. Even sometimes the tools have subcategories. The point is that Gatsby and Next.js are sort of competitors in a way, right? You're not really going to be doing both. And that's the key that I think people get confused about. They think that all this stuff they have to know. But really, you have to choose the thing, decide what tool you're going to use. So if you're going to use Gatsby, you're not going to use Next. Same thing with server side, same thing with databases. If you choose MongoDB, you're going to stick with that. After you choose your tool of choice, the third thing that goes unnoticed, that actually is contrary to what a lot of people think, is dive deep. What a lot of people think is that they need to skim the surface, and they think that if they kind of know everything, it's better. But the truth is, what is better and what's right is that you dive deep into the tools that you decided to learn. And let me explain. If you decided, okay, you know what? I'm all in on React. I'm going full stack or front end. I'm going to choose React. That is your tool. You're going to dive deep into React, and I'm certainly JavaScript, obviously, because React is just a framework for Java. You're going to ignore Vue. With all respect to Vue developers, with all respect to Angular developers, you're not concerned with Angular though now because you chose React. You're going to dive deep into React. You're going to stop any tutorials about Angular and Vue, and vice versa. If you choose Angular, you go deep in that. And then on the same side, amongst React, if you decided to choose MongoDB as the database of choice, then those are the tutorials. This gets you away from the tutorial hell, because the tutorial hell is kind of when you don't know what you're doing and you're just taking a bunch of tutorials and they all sort of clash, and ends up you kind of don't come up with a cohesive direction. But once you choose the tool, in that case, you're diving deep. MongoDB, you're only going into that. Contrary to what people think, well, I need to know all of this stuff because how am I going to get a job, or how am I going to stay up to date? Reality is you're going to stay up to date by diving deep, because when you dive deep, you're going to start building full-on applications. When you actually put these tools together, you'll be able to create the things that you've always wanted, things that, that you could put in your portfolio that companies want to see. But when you're skimming the surface and let me do a tutorial, you're kind of just painting the walls, right? Like if you go around painting the wall, you kind of don't know what's behind the wall. You don't know how to build the wall. So when you dive deep, you actually you start to come across the concepts in computer science, in development, that are across the domain of all the tools. You come across with like, well, how do I connect to a database? Because connecting to a database, some data, that is a concept that you're going to use no matter what code, no matter what language you use. As you dive deep, you're like, okay, how do I pull data? How do I fetch data? How do I, do routing And if you know how to do that with a JavaScript or React, what happens is, I think the ideal thing is that you choose the tool, you stick with it, you dive deep, that becomes you. You just do it. Like, don't worry about it. Like, any stack that you choose is not really going anywhere for the most part. If it's pretty much talked about, it's going to last for a while. The point is, when you dive deep, everyone wants to move one day from, if you say, you know what, I don't want React, I'm going to join the Vue side. You're going to know so much in React and all the concepts that when you go into Vue, you're going to know what to look for. You're going to be like, okay, like, how does Vue connect to a database? How does it fetch data? And then you'll be able to be like, oh, this kind of sucks the way it does it. Or you're like, oh, this is actually better, you know? And then you'll be able to switch easy. I think what people don't realize, that diving deep actually makes you more adaptable in general, because you're getting the concept. Those are the 3 things I think will take you through, especially your first year of development. People come in really overwhelmed. I think you just have to realize it's hard, you know, and coding and development is actually, it's not easy, you know, and it's not something that I think we all feel like we think we need to know it and know everything. But the truth is, we always feel like we never have it. I think all developers feel that. You're constantly trying to figure out, how do I do this thing? But again, if you go with this path, I think it'll solve a lot of the problems, because you'll actually become a master in it, as opposed to skimming the surface. And, you know, I think people never really want to choose, but the truth is, it will set you free. So again, just to reiterate, get the landscape, know the categories that go together, or the tools that are grouped with each other, and then choose amongst those categories the tool of your choice. So if you decide you're going for React, forget everything else. And what I mean by forget, I mean forget the other tools in that category. You're going to be choosing tools in the other category, but once you decide, that's what you go for. And third, dive deep into that stack. Use that stack, build things with that stack only and nothing else. I hope that's helpful. This has been Omar, and I will, catch you guys on the next one. I don't know if you guys like this, let me know, and I'll do more. I'll see you guys in the next one.